Cthulhu, one of Lovecraft's most iconic creations and infinitely marketable creepy crawlies. So Headfirst Production had this genius idea of making a game called Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth, only to bait and switch you for a retelling of Shadow over Innsmouth. Fucking assholes. Anyways, welcome to the second episode of the Games of Lovecraft. I was really looking forward to getting to this game because it's always brought up when people talk about Lovecraft games. And after that
You mean
absolute
hooch?
abortion that kicked off this series, I was happy to move on. I hope you're ready for the vastly inferior review to Mandalore Gaming's one. The game begins at a manor where there's this odd rumor of some kind of cult hiding out there. Why our protagonist was summoned to this raid without a weapon, I don't know. The game at this point is giving me more hope than Dawning of Dogshit though, because it's doing a lot of things right. At least it's far better in the voice acting department, although some of the characters sound like they belong in a 4Kids dub.
Sorry to startle you. Innsmouth doesn't get a lot of visitors. New names spread fast.
Talk about letting fate take its course.
This has to be one of the weirdest raids that I've ever seen in my life, because I'm the only one who seems like they've made it in this place. There's literally only about one cult member opening fire on the police. I love how you literally just casually walk up to him, with no gun by the way, and the cultist barely reacts to it before being killed. I expect people to act off in Lovecraft games, but some of the behavior of our characters is just so dumb. The basement of this place is kinda cool, and it has that same green hue that's reminiscent of the ending of that Necronomicon game. Eventually, our protagonist ends up summoning a bunch of Yiths to his location. These guys showed up in the Shadow Out of Time, so the story's also taking from that as well. I can say at the very least the developers were very clearly fond of Lovecraft's monsters and creations. We actually got to see a variety of them here, which is a lot more than what I expected. I do like the way that they just shuffle towards Jack here, and he barely even seems to care. He just accepts his fate and lets himself get diddled by the Yith. After returning to himself, he's now taken up a job as a private detective and is trying to find a missing person in Innsmouth. And does he venture there with any sort of pistol or armaments? No, because why would you? Some of the people who have actually read Lovecraft might have pointed out now that the narrator in the actual story is one Robert Olmsted, who's just a regular college student. I gotta be honest with you, Lovecraft's protagonists are easily some of the weakest things about his stories. I struggle to remember most of his main characters. That's fine because it's more focused on the mystery than the characters, and it also makes the humans feel a lot more inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. So the story is a little different from the original Shadow over Innsmouth tale. Innsmouth is pretty much a go-to location for a lot of Lovecraft, and it makes a lot of sense. It's a fun setup, and it's an area where you're an outsider in this bizarre fish town. It's a very unique vibe and aesthetic. The most fun I had during this game was during this segment here. It nails Innsmouth, and it even includes some characters from the story like Zadok Allens and Joe Sargent. The gameplay here is also really fun as you snoop around town and trade items with villagers as you uncover the mystery. It reminded me a lot of those older immersive sims like Thief or Deus Ex, and then I realized how cool it would be if there was actually a Lovecraft immersive sim. Signs that something is off about the town continue to pop up until you head back to your hotel. You go back and check the front desk office and read about him eating another person here. If you look around the room, you'll see a dismembered head in one of the drawers. I do feel like this game only appreciates Lovecraft's work on a bit of a superficial level because of the gory moments. Lovecraft did not focus on those aspects in his work, rather the indifference of reality to humanity. That is the terrifying nature of cosmic horror. Most of the scares here are from blood and guts itself. As you look at some of the more upsetting scenery in this game, you will actually lose sanity. It's a Lovecraft game, so it needs a sanity meter. Cthulhu might not be present in the actual game, but he can mess around with your head. Before I returned to the hotel, I encountered a scene of this woman hanging. The game then promptly froze, and I was left wondering if it was Cthulhu messing with my game, but it's actually just because the Steam port sucks. Generally, this mechanic really amounts to is just odd visual quirks. A few times at the beginning it got me a little bit, but it gets more annoying as the game goes on. Like during this super intense rendition of the chase from Shadow over Innsmouth, you get to a point where you need to jump, but the slowdown messed me up a lot. From this point onward, you have to hide and run away from the townsfolk throughout multiple buildings. This has to be the most non-functional stealth that I've ever seen in a game. In my playthrough, I was being chased by the Order Dagon, and I jumped over this fence and it lost me. The enemy's behavior is very strange in this game. They literally wanted to tear me limb from limb just a few minutes ago, and then they just gave up. One thing that's always weirded me out about the beginning segments is these characters just seem to pop out of nowhere and find you. It's like they have some kind of GPS tracker on you. The biggest example of that would be Mackie, a government agent that's inspecting the town. You do eventually find Burnham, the guy you were looking for, and you also get a shotgun and pistol. This is where the game really starts to lose me. I read on the wiki page that the FPS elements of this game were actually added later on, as the game was delayed since 1999, and it makes sense. It feels super tacked on and underdeveloped. You don't do a ton of it as you escape, but the gunplay in this game is just and there's no strategy in this segment that involves them. As you drive away, Burnham ends up getting killed, which is odd because he was borderline bulletproof a couple minutes ago. The game continues to adapt Shadow over Innsmouth with the raid that takes place towards the end of the story. But instead of having some existential crisis over finding out your family lineage, we actually get to join in this time, and thankfully we're armed. The characters at this point feel a bit out of place to me in a Lovecraft story. Like, there's almost a corniness to Jack Walter, and especially with Edgar Hoover and his stereotypical nasally detective voice.
Jack, you better stay in the car while my agents secure the entrance.
Jack Walter is far braver than most Lovecraft protagonists. Most of them would be breaking down at this point, but he approaches everything with his dry wit. Chapter 5 takes place in this oil refinery, and it is the worst section of the game by far. Due to the game being extremely linear, it feels so boring as you sweep generic metal hallways with the most basic gunplay ever. It starts off kind of cool, but then it quickly loses that. I can see why they chose Innsmouth over any other Lovecraft story. It's the most action-packed one, but I feel like they lost what they had going at the beginning. There's these segments towards the end that thankfully breaks the pace with Shoggoth appearing. I was expecting more of them in the game. The next chapter, the game turns into Call of Duty, where we ransack more of the Order of Dagon. This chapter made me realize the main problem of this game. It just doesn't feel right blowing away all these abominations. An issue with horror games is once they feature combat, they can quickly lose all tension, especially when you can just put them down so easily. There has to be some kind of balance, especially when we're dealing with Lovecraft's creations. I mean, the whole point of them is to showcase the powerlessness of humanity in the face of cosmic horror. It gets worse in Chapter 7, where you fight these guys that are way bigger than any human, and literally Dagon himself, and you kill him. I'm not necessarily against the idea of gunplay in Lovecraft games, but I think it depends on what the game's goal is. If it didn't start off like the way it did, I wouldn't fault it as much. After the boat nonsense, you get swept under to Devil's Reef, and it's kind of underwhelming. I'm not really a big fan of cave areas in games either. They're pretty hard to make interesting. I wish we got to spend more time with the Marsh family while we were down here, because the scene where they turn on themselves is actually kind of interesting. While you're down here, you end up getting this mystical energy weapon, and it's just so goofy. You end up using it to defeat Hydra too. I mean, we might as well be hunting down the whole mythos at this point. This boss is also horrible and repetitive, where you swap minds with the minions and hit these statues until you eventually electrify her to death. I guess it did feel pretty satisfying to do that, but you don't really win, as the Yith leader reveals that our consciousness was swapped with one of the other Yiths during our raid on the manor, so Jack ends up offing himself at the end. I guess it did get that hopeless ending right, but that's all there is to it. There were supposed to be more games, but it bombed commercially. I'd certainly say it's a step up from the last time, but that's not really saying much. It got a lot right, but the stuff that it got wrong was really wrong. It's another case of a game that was too afraid to stick to its own guns, ironically enough. The beginning feels like a totally different game in comparison to the end. You can easily see how tacked on the combat feels. Like at the beginning, you get ammo way before you even see a gun. It's like they literally just went back to the first part of the game and added that to promise the players that there will be combat at the very last second. So it ends up being in a really weird spot where it doesn't really go far enough in either direction to be that special. Thankfully, we got plenty more games to look at under our belt here, so stay tuned for that. See you next time.